Michelangelo. When you hear that name, you probably think of these incredible, larger-than-life masterpieces. But what about the man behind them? Well, behind the towering marble and the breathtaking frescoes was a person who lived a life of, believe it or not, profound loneliness. So let's get into this paradox, the story of one of history's most celebrated and isolated artists.
And that's really the big question we're tackling today. Why was he so lonely? This isn't just some biographical trivia, you know? The answer gets to the very heart of his creative process, and maybe even the source of his genius. So let's investigate. Why was the master of the Renaissance so utterly alone?
You can see the contradiction right here. On one side, you have these monumental public works, the David, the Pieta, the Sistine Chapel. I mean, they're symbols of human potential, of divine beauty. And on the other side, well, the historical sources, they paint a totally different picture. That of a deeply solitary and isolated man. This wasn't just a phase, it was a fundamental part of who he was.
Okay, so to figure this out, we're gonna break our investigation into 5 parts. We'll look at the paradox of his fame, we'll dive into his pretty difficult personality, then his obsession with work, his hidden emotional world, and finally, how all this isolation actually shaped his incredible art.
First up, let's tackle this core paradox. I mean, the guy was a superstar. He was sought after by popes and princes, the most powerful people in the world. And yet, he remained this solitary giant. What's so wild is that his loneliness wasn't a choice he made when no one knew him. It was a state he kept even at the absolute peak of his success.
And, you know, a huge piece of this whole puzzle was the man himself. We have to look at his temperament, a personality that seems like it was almost as rigid and unyielding as the marble he carved.
The historical record is pretty clear on this. Michelangelo was known for being, well, intense and difficult. He was his own worst critic, demanding absolute perfection from himself. And unlike a lot of his rivals, he actively avoided court life and big social events. He really believed that only in solitude could he truly focus. As you can imagine, a personality like that made it incredibly hard for him to build or even keep close friendship.
But it wasn't just his personality. There was another massive factor here, his all-consuming obsessive relationship with his work. For Michelangelo, art wasn't just a job, it was a total sacrifice. It was this immense burden that he felt he alone had to carry.
His method was his isolation. He would literally lock himself away for huge stretches of time, cutting himself off not just physically from the world, but emotionally too. Just try to imagine the years he spent lying on his back on the scaffolding of the Sistine Chapel, almost completely alone. And the cost of this isolation was just immense. His own letters from that time are, well, they're heartbreaking. He talks about utter exhaustion, constant physical pain from the twisted positions he worked in, and this deep, deep emotional strain. He wasn't just creating art up there. He was pouring his entire being, all his suffering, onto that ceiling.
This physical isolation also fed right into his emotional life, because beyond the insane demands of his work, there was this deeper, more complex inner world that he kept hidden from pretty much everyone. We get a rare peek into this hidden world through his poetry, and is filled with this profound sense of longing, intense spiritual conflict, and a really powerful emotional restraint. You can tell he felt things so deeply, but something was holding him back from ever really expressing it openly. Now, to really get this, we have to remember the time he was living in. The Renaissance had all these strict social and religious rules about behavior, especially about how you expressed your feelings. A lot of scholars think Michelangelo was wrestling with these intense emotions that he just couldn't share. So what did he do? He chose to redirect all of that powerful energy straight into his art. And you'd think, maybe he could find some relief with his patrons, right? The people paying for the art? Nope. Even though they were the most powerful men in the world, these relationships were purely professional, and honestly, they were often incredibly tense. He frequently felt misunderstood and controlled by them, which just made him feel even more alone in his artistic mission. Okay, so let's bring all these threads together, because this is where we see how his profound isolation didn't just define his life, it fundamentally shaped his art, and, in the process, created a whole new idea of what an artist could even be.
See, before Michelangelo, artists were largely seen as really skilled craftsmen, part of a workshop, part of a team. But he saw himself completely differently. He was an individual creator, a solitary genius with a unique vision. For his time, this was a totally radical, modern idea.
And when you embrace an identity like that, as the singular creator, it naturally sets you apart. It deepened his separation from the whole social fabric that supported other artists. He was on his own path, and that path was, by its very nature, a lonely one. And here's the amazing part. You can literally see this struggle in his sculptures. Just look at his famous Slave series. The figures aren't just emerging from the marble. They seem eternally trapped within it, tense, fighting to get out. It's like a perfect mirror of his own sense of confinement, his own personal battle to bring his inner vision out into the world.
So we've examined all the evidence. Let's bring it all together for the verdict on why one of history's greatest artists was also one of its loneliest.
It really wasn't one single thing, was it? It was more like a perfect storm. You had his intense, perfectionistic personality, his obsessive dedication to work that demanded he be alone, those tense and impersonal relationships with his powerful patrons, and a deep emotional repression that was pretty common for his time.
But here's the real takeaway. In the end, Michelangelo's isolation wasn't a weakness. It didn't hold his art back. It was the very crucible in which his genius was forged. His loneliness wasn't just some side note to his art. It was absolutely essential to it. And this leaves us with a really challenging question. When you look at the life of Michelangelo, you kind of have to ask yourself, does true greatness in art demand this level of personal sacrifice? Is profound loneliness the price you have to pay to create something immortal? It's definitely a question worth thinking about.